All right, welcome to episode 2. This week's episode is about contract to hire. Now, before I get started, I did want to apologize. I listened to episode 1 because this is very much a building in public type of podcast. And what I realized is I was fairly flat, I was fairly emotionless in the voicing of it, and it's because I haven't created any content like this in a little while. So I want to keep this more conversational, just a little bit lighter on the tonality, and ideally that'll improve over time as I keep listening to my episodes and keep trying to learn and improve from them. So stay tuned. Thank you for working with me at this early stage to build up this backlog, and hopefully you learn a few useful things out of it. So today we're talking about contract to hire, and I want to talk a little bit about how you frame this up. Depending on what country you're in, depending what you do, this may or may not be relevant. But what I'm referring to here is taking contractors, some kind of resource that you know you want to work with, maybe for a temporary amount of time, and making them into employees. And there's certain situations when this is an appropriate choice, and there's other situations where it's just never going to be a good or viable choice. An example of where it may never be viable is if you have some kind of massive amount of seasonality to your business and you need to get extra people to come in and help you. It's unlikely that those people at the margin will be your future employees. It could be the case that they're really good and they just happen to be working temp at that time. But a lot of times, the best people will find some kind of full-time employment to engage themselves. You have some people on the edge, maybe they're college students or people who have a little time during that period of the year, and you would want to have them as employees. But usually this isn't just people you staff up for temporary work, but it's a position you're thinking about filling full-time, but you want to test out working with the person for a little while. So a great example of that, I see this in a lot of tech companies, is a designer, right? People will want to contract to hire a designer because it's very hard to learn about someone's aesthetic skills and abilities to deliver on the job. So they'll wait to make that person into a full-time hire, but they will start by working with them because that's a way to start getting a sense of what they can do. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying contract to hire. And the mode that you actually end up hiring somebody in matters less. You could actually take a contractor from a let's see how this works 90 days to a long-term contract, but the point is that you know they're going to be there for a long time and they're making that plan. If you want to make them a W-2 employee, that's fine, that's useful in the United States, but that's really just a kind of designation, and I want to differ that, or at least differ the most of it from, you're really talking about permanence versus temporary, right? So contract to hire is often in the midpoint where you do want to work with someone for a little bit, but the cost of getting this role wrong is high enough that you do want to get it right. So let's talk about that contract to hire process. Let's do what we've done before, and I'm going to pull out a smaller number of questions from ChatGPT, but we're going to say what are the key questions to ask in designing this program. So let's take a look at what it tells us. All right, so here's what we have in ChatGPT. I'm designing a generic process for contract to hire. What are 5 critical questions I should be asking about the design of this program? This is in the US, but I intend for it to be general purpose for hiring overseas as well. So I'll put that question mark there, and let's see what ChatGPT tells us. All right, I think ChatGPT came up with some really good starting questions, and I want to talk about each of these and why each is going to be relevant in our creation here. So we first have, how will we structure compliance across jurisdictions? This just means you have to figure out what you need to do in order to be legally compliant for what you're calling people and how long you're contracting them and what kind of devices you're giving them. I don't want to go into all the ins and outs about that because it really is a legal and labor question, but you just need to have some kind of process in place to manage that aspect of it so you don't run afoul of the legal system. This one is more interesting to me in terms of the business impact. What is the evaluation criteria and timeline for conversion? So I think this is really important to define up front. I think you want to make sure that a contract to hire person knows how long it will be before they'll be having a conversation about being hired and what will that rest on. So one example would be that designer that I brought up earlier. You could probably get a good sense of a designer, particularly at a small company, in 90 days. So that's a great benchmark to do. I think 3 months is a very common contract to hire time period. And after that point, you should be able to have that conversation with them about what's the next step for them becoming full-time. And I think you can set that process in motion by having that date on the calendar right when they start, so they have that sense of assurance. What compensation and benefits apply during the contract period versus full hire? This I like to establish where a contract period is just you get paid for when you're working. Usually it's an hourly wage. Sometimes it's based on weekly wages if there's some more variance and it's just easier to do that way. Sometimes it's a project-based wage. Whatever it is, it's just pay for that. And I'm not offering separate sick time or vacation or really anything. And in part, that is to both comply with number one, but also to just make it very clear that they are working for what they get, and that is the nature of it. And then usually once they become full hire, even if they want to remain in some kind of contracting capacity, we set up the deal so that they still have things like time off, sick days, some of the other time they need to just be part of the company life and events as opposed to just be doing this particular job. So full-time is this long game of, instead of thinking of you're doing a job for me this hour, I'm starting to think of how long are you going to work for me and what kinds of roles and experiences will you need to have within the company and how do I keep you from getting completely burned out. So it's a different conversation when you get to that point. All right, how will we manage the candidate experience and retention risk? This is a really good one. So what ChatGPT is saying here is there's a lot of candidates who won't contract to hire because they would prefer to just go get a full-time job, and in their line of work, because it's highly specialized, they can get a full-time job, and so it's not a thing that they want to do. Now, sometimes for the right kind of job, they'll take a leap with it. So some of this is just figuring out, is this the kind of role I can contract to hire, right? Let's go back to designers. Anyone who's worked freelance in their career probably would be fine with doing contract to hire. Let's go instead to the other side of the line. You could have physicians, right? I mean, I've never hired a physician, but I've never also heard of a contract to hire situation with physicians. And a big part of that is just that the knowledge and the licensure and everything they bring is so pivotal to the operation that you really, just can't take a chance on it and see how it works in 90 days. So there's going to be certain roles that you just can't contract to hire, but you're always thinking about what is the incentive of that person to take a contract job, particularly if it's spelled out clearly for them that within X amount of time, they're going to be having some kind of full-time conversation. And last question, what is our operational and legal process for conversion or termination? So this is just now kind of like number one, what are the nuts and bolts of how we convert this person versus terminate them? This is going to be heavily dependent on your legal jurisdiction. That's, state, city, country, all that. I'm not going to go deep into that, but I'm just saying you need to have a process for that. You need to figure out what you are going to do and what it means to do this. And like I said, there's different kinds of contract to hire. You might have one person who you want to contract to hire, and they're very into getting company health insurance. So they're obviously going to want to switch to a W-2 in a U.S.-based context. There's another person you contract to hire, and they're really actually happy to run their own business. They like running their own business, and instead what they want to have is a long-term contract with you as a retainer. I consider these very similar things for the purpose of this conversation, because what we're talking about is business outcomes, not different classifications in the labor laws. So this is all about, do I have a long-term resource who's committed to this business in some meaningful sense? And you could argue that maybe W-2 employees are more committed, but I would say that you could certainly have some contractor relationships where, as long as you're the main customer or 80% of what they're doing, there's probably going to be a long-term commitment there too. I've seen, frankly, a lot of alignment in that kind of work, especially when the vendor and the customer really get to know each other quite well. And so you'll see this a lot for solo vendors that maybe run their own LLC and they want to go, almost exclusive with this customer, but they do still like the flexibility of running their own business. That can be a really, really good arrangement for certain kinds of specializations. Okay, so we've talked about the questions. What I'm going to do is copy these over to our document, and then we're going to get into the flowchart state in Lucidchart. All right, so here we have our flow, and this is a little bit simpler, but I want to point out some of the key pieces here that some people may forget when they're doing this. So you should have a regular evaluation schedule. This is why I said weekly evaluations, and the idea here is to provide the kind of course-correcting feedback that you can. You should know within a week or two if someone's able to take and manage that feedback. And make no mistake, someone who's in a contract to hire role should understand the provisional nature of their employment, and they will manage accordingly, or they won't. And then you'll see that they won't actually make it there. But this is why you want to be incredibly clear, and this is the other thing I said, is meeting stated expectations. So you really want to tell them this is what a good process looks like. You're a designer, this is how many design assets I expect you to be finishing each week. And if those things are not happening, I certainly expect to have good reasons, good explanations for those things. What you don't want to do is fall into a routine where you have someone on the team who you generally like and you think they're pleasant to be around and they're nice to work with, but that they slip on all the actual expectations. This period is the real period where you can push them to define that well, especially because if someone's going to be in long-term employment, there's going to be periods where they're moving faster or slower in their career. Things maybe slip here and there from time to time, but this first period where your contract to hire is really a chance to prove it. This is why I think this is one of the best ways to hire people, because you actually get a chance to work with them. So weekly evaluations, if they're not meeting the stated expectations, now you can give them a week to correct, maybe two, depending on your timeline. But after that, you'll want to provide them notice, because remember, whatever you originally inked out maybe also has a 2-week notice period, maybe a 1-week notice period. Some businesses where there's more security concerns, actually they say you are going to be terminated immediately, but we'll have some kind of severance, like a week or two, to just give that to you. Whatever the case, the key thing you want to do is protect the business and do the timeline you agreed upon from a payment standpoint, but that doesn't mean you need to keep the person around. If you feel like giving them notice would completely demoralize them and make them not really contribute anything to the team, it's probably better to just let them go. I've never really seen it work particularly well. Every now and then it can, when someone's just doing a job that's so incredibly routine that there's not a lot that they can mess up about it, but most people will get demoralized and not really want to contribute at that point. But if they are meeting the stated expectations and you're now 80% through the period, you need to be crafting that offer, because you can't give them the offer on the very last day. You have to give them the offer towards the end. It's the old Wayne Gretzky thing, skate to where the puck is going to be, right? So you know that they're going to get to that point, so just get them there, get them the offer, and you don't know, because you may get tied up in the negotiations and the specifics of that offer. I've been in the situation before where it wasn't quite ironed out, and what we had to do was just extend the contract, and that's fine. It can work in some cases, but it does create this initial moment where the goals and the plan and the schedule and the trust that was created gets a little bit breached by that process. So you'd be much better just saying, look, I'm 80% of the way through the period. This person's working out. They're doing as I expect. So I've now better proven them out than any other random person that's going to walk in here off Indeed. So I might as well just make them that offer. And that provides a lot of stability to all your relationships with vendors and employees if you can actually just make and keep to a schedule, because they will see that and they will try and do the same thing for you. So it's a good way to live and provide that example for them. So I'm going to throw the flow into the document here right below our questions, and then we're going to get to the last part where we talk about what the full procedure is, and hopefully this gives you just the sense of what we're doing, and then we'll bring that back in there from ChatGPT and review it. All right, so we have ChatGPT right here, and we just put in the flow chart. It knows what our questions are, so let's see what it comes up with for an SOP. All right, so we can see the document here. We've got the flow, and we've got the initial procedure that ChatGPT wrote. Now, I just had an idea that I thought will help to make this a little bit better. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the video here and take the transcript of the existing video that we have, and then I'm going to feed that transcript back into ChatGPT and say, enhance the procedure based on some of the things said in this video. So what it's going to do is take some more of my commentary as we're going through the show, and it will include that in our procedure, which I think is actually going to tighten it up a bit in terms of getting to some of the specific things, particularly around success metrics and some of the nuance. So let's see how that works, and if it doesn't work, we'll still have a good story to tell, because it's a good way to try and see how, especially in this kind of LLM world, that we can reuse some of the information we're creating to our advantage. And creating a nice long audio recording like this provides us with the transcript, which provides us with more information we can feed right into the LLM. So I'll come back after this, after we try it out, and let's see what we get out of it. All right, so I have uploaded the SRT file, which is what Loom sends out transcripts in. And what I asked is for it to update the procedure using this transcript. So let's see what it comes up with here. So this is pretty cool. It took the transcript quickly and was able to update it a little bit. And it did pull out some interesting things from the conversation. My emphasis on framing, the emphasis on tone and positionings. So just a recognition that we have to be transparent with the candidates, and then the global applicability. So tighten up the SOP right here. I'm going to copy the new one into the document, but I'm actually pretty happy with this as a concept, which is record myself talking about the SOP, get the transcript, and then have it tighten up that same SOP. So this is contract to hire. This is what we want to get across, and we want to think about this in the way that you are ultimately dealing with human beings and incentives, which means you want to make this attractive and transparent for them, but also something that enables your business to learn on the job with people. There's a lot of ways to hire. Some are really good and some are very risky, And I actually think this one, when it's allowed and when you can do it, is probably the best way to hire, because it creates a system where we can evaluate candidates on a day-to-day basis and actually work with them and actually start to develop that kind of trust that we're going to need, or see where they're not going to make it on the job and make that much clearer before we actually have to go that next step and make a long-term commitment to them and their development and being a member of the team. So hopefully you found this useful. Obviously, very happy for any kind of feedback you can give me on either medium. And like I said, I'm going to try and keep it more conversational, a little lighter. I'm practicing every week, and I do force myself to listen back to my last show just so I can learn some of the things that I can do better and to better explain all the things you will need to build these kind of processes.